Welcome back to The Changeover. Coming up this week.
The first thing that really is paramount above all others is you have to know how to position and pitch your value. Positioning, understanding where you fit versus your competitors and what that value is and how to speak to it in a way that makes sense to the audience. There's a famous phrase that Hemingway wrote about.
We're going to Hemingway already.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
When asked about bankruptcy, how did it happen? Well, gradually, then suddenly. That's kind of how things are with AI right now. They started off gradually for many years and then suddenly, and it's really accelerating. So what I would say what's changing is the pace. The fundamentals are still the fundamentals. We've always had to learn, but the pace at which we learn has really picked up, because if we're not trying to learn faster and better, we risk being left behind. Essentially, I'm looking for people who, are willing to win together and lose together. There's a lot of anxiety and anxiousness around AI, and I think people are correct to be focused on understanding how they can leverage it, how it can impact them. But at the same time, AI is not a strategy. AI is a tool.
Hi, I'm Greg Linnemanstons, president of Weidert Group. On this episode of the Changeover podcast, we're exploring the fundamentals of growth for businesses, including industrial companies, what it is, why it matters, and what it looks like in today's world. Joining me today is my friend Kurt Hahlbeck, a strategist, entrepreneur, advisor, coach, and mentor to B2Bs. Well, welcome to the Changeover, Kurt. I'm thrilled to have you here as a guest and very excited to talk about what is one of my favorite subjects, which is business growth. That's part of our positioning, is an agent for growth with our clients. And we're thrilled to have you on the show today because we know how much you know about growth. You've built a career. Well, you've built a career around growing things, and that's why it's really appropriate that we hear from you today. Let's start by providing a little bit of a foundation. Your thoughts. You and I have talked about this many times, but your thoughts on the system. If you were describing a growth system, what the key elements are.
So, I've been doing this for decades and learned a lot of what not to do. And over the years, I've sort of honed in on what I consider the fundamentals of growth, sort of the things that you need to have, the right environment, if you will, to make sure that you can really grow. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that really is paramount above all others is you have to know how to position and pitch your value. Positioning, understanding where you fit versus your competitors and what that value is and how to speak to it in a way that makes sense to the audience. That's really the most fundamental. Then you have to know how to go out and find and qualify need. You have to be able to design your products, your services, your experiences, ultimately to deliver to your brand, if you will, to build your brand. And then sort of the other bookend that's also paramount is you have to make sure that you're aligning to your customers' desired outcomes, because it's all about them. So you've got to make sure everything you're doing is designed to help deliver to that outcome. You may not own all of the variables that contribute to that outcome, but the ones that you do, you got to make sure are aligned to what their outcome is. Those four things I think I've learned over the years are paramount, and everything that you do has to be oriented with one, some, or all of those things in mind.
So jumping into the reason why we're talking about it now is things are changing fast. Mm-hmm. And they're changing in a way that fundamentally affects the way we are able to grow. When you think about that, what would you point to as the most dynamically changing aspects of that growth formula?
There's a famous phrase that Hemingway wrote about.
We're going to Hemingway already.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
When asked about bankruptcy, how did it happen? Well, gradually, then suddenly. That's kind of how things are with AI right now. They started off gradually for many years and then suddenly, and it's really accelerating. So what I would say what's changing is the pace. The fundamentals are still the fundamentals. We've always had to learn, but the pace at which we learn has really picked up, because if we're not trying to learn faster and better, we risk being left behind. Time is not necessarily on our side like it used to be. Growing up as a kid on a farm, we measured things in seasons. Well, today, with everything digital, things happen in nanoseconds, and the accumulation of data and lots of it. It's sort of a blessing and a curse, but it's a blessing in the sense that we can learn so much more, so much faster now than we used to be able to. So I think that's, for me, it's not so much that I've seen technologies come and go over my career. It's just the acceleration. Things are moving so much faster.
Yeah. So when you think about pros and cons, let's start with the pros. What are the things that really get you excited about the benefits that AI brings us when it comes to the speed of learning and the speed of growth?
I've had a lot of different positions and capabilities over my career: sales, marketing, customer service, operations, etc. One of the greatest learning opportunities I've always had is when I get to be with customers. The challenge is I can't be in every customer meeting all the time. So having tools like, as an example, Notebook LM, which is able to take recordings and digital content of summarizations of meetings and things like that and pull it together. And now you can see, as an example, across your entire sales force, what are our customers talking about? What are their concerns? Or in our customer service calls, what are all the things that are happening? Markets evolve, customers' needs evolve. So, just to use an example, think about when we first started using computers. Well, what was the big thing everybody was competing on was processor speed. And so processor, they come out with a faster chip and a faster chip. Until that didn't matter anymore, then it was memory. Well, it was this much memory, then that much memory. Until that didn't matter anymore because it was battery life. Suffice to say, it's just customer needs evolve over time. And while we focus on particular features, if you will, they start migrating towards other things as those features are good enough that they're not willing to pay more for more. Now they want something different and something additional. So I think that's a great benefit, that this ability to process and listen, if you will, to all the things that are going on and help to synthesize that together so that we can do it much faster than we would have been able to. Again, you can't physically be in every meeting. You can't read every meeting notes. So to be able to have a tool like that can aid you and pick up on trends so that you can start to anticipate, the market's starting to move. This feature isn't so critical anymore. It's something different. Or these word choices have sort of fallen out of favor, and now we're going to pivot.
Yeah. I read something just in the past week. It was talking about the fact that we're all now listening to a lot of the same stuff. We all have access to the same knowledge base to ask questions of. And the writer in that case said, if we all just repeat back what we've heard, we're all going to sound the same. Right. And we're going to sound the same faster than we ever have before. What's the takeaway from that? What's the warning to all of us using AI to learn faster?
If you want better outcomes, you got to ask better questions. We have a tendency to kind of limit our questions to what Donald Rumsfeld talked about, known knowns, Mark Twain had a famous quote: "It ain't so much what you don't know, it's what you think you know that ain't so." We also have our own biases. We make assumptions, and we tend to cling to these assumptions without challenging them. And so we don't often ask questions to challenge our current thinking. And if you're not asking the right questions, then you're not necessarily getting the right information. So you're right. We all have access to a lot of the same information, but for those who are asking better questions, you're likely going to get better insights. And when you have better insights, then you can take better actions.
You mentioned that I think the value of asking great questions.
That's where humans can differentiate themselves.
Yeah. How do we create a culture where we encourage and value those great questions? Because it's harder to create that culture of good critical thinking that leads you to those new whys and why nots.
So I had a friend share with me what he thought were the 3 essential characteristics of a culture that would be necessary for asking better questions. The first one's humility. If you're not humble, then there's nothing I can tell you you don't already know. So humility is absolutely necessary because you have to assume you don't know. The second thing would be empathy. There has to be a willingness and a desire to step into somebody else's shoes, to see things from their perspective. We tend to see, things head on, but when you look at it from a different angle, so like this coffee cup, I see it from this angle, but you're seeing it from this angle. We see different things, but it's still the same coffee cup. So empathy says, we want to get other perspectives because the blending of those perspectives gets us a closer approximation to the truth. And then the last thing would be curiosity.
Yeah.
We should be willing to want to dig in and just ask why, like that, 2-year-old, that incessant 2-year-old, why? So I think those three things, and I've really embraced that. I heard that probably about 7-8 years ago, and I've really tried to embrace that as I approach each situation to make sure that I don't come in having all the answers. Instead, be humble enough to admit there's probably a lot of things I don't know. Try to hear other people's perspectives. And don't be afraid to ask the follow-up questions to try to unpack and dig into the, what's behind that.
Yeah. So coming back to growth, when you think about the potential downsides of relying on AI and an attitude of reliance on AI, what's the negative to what it can do to our ability to grow?
People need to realize AI is not a prescient thing. It's technology. There's still zeros and ones behind it. And having been in technology for over 40 years, we learned a very valuable lesson. I made this mistake many times early in my career. If you automate a mess, you get a faster mess. So underlying what you really need to be careful about is if your data is of poor quality, AI is going to get you to bad answers more quickly. You'll be efficient about it, but you won't be effective. Data is probably one of the dirty little secrets. Most organizations, their data is generally not the cleanest. It's not always the most relevant, and you still have to get to the important things. So data is problematic. Sometimes we have a tendency to want to over-engineer things to sort of take all the humans out of the equation, but there are places where humans add value and are necessary. So we want to be more intentional about understanding where is the best places to leverage AI. Oftentimes what I've seen in my career is most technology investments were there to eliminate the human, which isn't necessarily a bad answer in and of itself, but it's done without giving thought to, but what is the role of the human in what we're trying to accomplish? And let's design around the human as opposed to let's just have the human there to serve the technology. So that's where I think sometimes that can lead us into, bad answers between the data and the not understanding how technology can best serve, what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. Sometimes, again, people confuse efficiency and effectiveness. And technology automation typically is done because it's an efficiency play, a productivity play. And so great, it's cheaper, but if it's still giving us bad answers, well, what good is it?
Yeah. I just saw something in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. It was a statement from Shopify. The CEO of Shopify directed all of their hiring managers, so anybody who's got authority to hire, that before they hired anybody, they had to ask the question, can AI do the job we're hiring for? Mm-hmm. To me, I took it as a frightening reaction on their part.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to it's not necessarily a bad question. I would just flip the question a little to say, what's the purpose of having a human being in this role? How does a human being bring value that an AI alone or that technology alone can't? And let's understand that. And then that way we're being intentional about this. So then we're really creating a job that should have some staying power and some fulfillment, if you will, for the individual, doing that job. If we're hiring into a job that we know can be automated within a couple of years, well, are we really doing a service to that individual to try to create that job?
Yeah.
So I think it's not necessarily the intention or the question maybe could be just refined slightly to make it a little more human first, but it's not a bad to understand that because at the end of the day, when you especially look at the demographic challenges that we have, you should be asking those questions.
Well, there's a news story recently, a Wisconsin story, about the reaction to all the tariff activity and trying to attract manufacturing back to Wisconsin. And somebody in the leadership of the Wisconsin Manufacturing Council said, we couldn't take more manufacturing here. We've got hundreds of thousands of jobs unfilled today. And so we should be asking the question of how do we use technology to get more productivity from our workers?
Absolutely. That's a big part of it. I mean, I think another part of it is also just trying to recalibrate people's perceptions of what a manufacturing job is today versus, what it was, 50 years ago when I was entering the workforce. It was a dirty job, oftentimes dangerous, et cetera. Today, they're high-tech jobs and they can be very rewarding and fulfilling. They tend to be actually a bit more highly engineered than they used to be. So I think part of it is the perceptions, as well.
Well, so they require more today.
Yeah, you're not going to get one with just a basic high school education.
No.
You're going to have to go to tech school. So I think every job to a certain extent today, you've got to ask yourself, what continuing education will I need? And don't assume that a high school education is good enough to have a sustainable job in the marketplace today.
Thinking about growth, we've talked about what AI does to speed. If I'm faster to learn and you're faster to learn and competition across the street is also faster to learn, what happens to business cycles where we used to feel if we were introducing something new, we had a free go-round, a free cycle. Mm-hmm. And now what do you think? How short is the cycle today?
The answer kind of differs depending upon who you are. So, if you're a large multinational corporate, trust me, people are watching you globally in every move that you're making. And it's very hard to be
under the radar.
Under the radar, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And so your cycles are getting shorter and shorter, to be sure, which again kind of goes to this point of positioning. There's only two ways to differentiate yourself or to position yourself, and it's through differentiation or through pricing. And if we get into the pricing game, it's all about commoditization then at that point. And you really have to have some key competitive advantages to sustain low prices. So it really puts pressure on how can we be different in understanding, again, what the market wants, who that market is, how do we segment that market? So strategy is more paramount than ever. Strategy is about making choices, which geographies, which customers, which problems, which jobs to be done. That's where, that positioning really becomes critical. And then the pitching, a part of it is understanding, again, what does the customer want? Because it's one thing to think about just the product. So Rolls-Royce and GE have been making jet engines for a long time. But the reality is none of the commercial airlines own those jet engines on their planes. GE, Aerospace, and Rolls-Royce, they actually own those engines and they provide them as a service. And so they do all the maintenance, they do all the checking on it, et cetera, because it's become so highly specialized. And the airlines were completely happy to turn it over because that was a complex endeavor that required staffing and training, et cetera, that they just didn't have.
And GE was happy to do it because they wanted to grow the leasing business.
Exactly. And so now it turned what was a transactional sale into a subscription service. And so it created a different cash flow model for them. And so that, again, that positioning changed, because they started to recognize the job for hire wasn't just, I need an engine. It was, I need an engine that's up all the time when I need to fly it. And that's different. That's a different job than just, here's an engine and now you take care of it. So I know a lot of your customer base are industrial manufacturers. I think that's an opportunity for them to think about, we provide machines and parts for organizations, but what services and experiences on top of that might be really helpful for our customers, especially those who are challenged with their own staffing shortages. And when talent is a problem, maybe can we leverage our expertise on top of the products and things that we deliver to reposition and reorient what it is that we're doing and maybe make for a smoother flow, if you will, smoother cash flow.
Yeah. That just made me think about something, Kurt. In the environment we're in right now, because of the uncertainty around tariffs, there's all sorts of supply chain disruption. And our clients could be promising less disruption because we're going to guarantee that your lines are running because we own the lines. You own the output. Be an entirely different model.
Right. So again, in that moment of, learning and adaptation, for some industries and for some organizations, the challenges, the macro challenges presented by tariffs are actually a huge opportunity for them because it doesn't impact them. And so they can turn what might be some competitors' weaknesses now into their strength because they won't face those same challenges. So absolutely. So again, this is about this learning and dealing with ever-changing, external context out there. You've got to be aware of it because these things could be leveraged, to your advantage. Absolutely. Yeah. So tariffs aren't universally bad for everybody. They're bad for some. The question is, how do you cope with it? And how does it impact you? What does it mean to your customer base? And for some, it could be, hey, this doesn't impact us at all. And we feel great that we can assure you that we can provide you business, continuously. Yeah. And if that's a problem with some of your other suppliers, then maybe you should talk to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all know, anybody who's been in business a while knows that disruption is an opportunity for change, which can equate to growth.
Right.
And it's for the people who know what to do with the disruption, who see it as an opportunity to pivot. Because disruption is a great time to pivot because there's a lot of dust in the air.
Absolutely. And disruption, you have to cope with it. You can't just stick your head in the sand and ignore it. It's there and it's inevitable. So, people have talked about, AI, well, it's a passing thing. Well, it isn't. No. And it is disruptive. The question isn't, well, should I embrace it? The question is, how should I embrace it to my advantage? How does it align to our strategy? Yeah. So, again, I would argue, for every organization, to the extent that, its role in growth is how can it help me learn more and better and faster about my customers, their marketplace, their challenges, the things that set up the context so that I know I'm delivering things of value to them that are different, that I can capture value for and make a good profit.
When we think about this accelerating pace of change, the almost constant disruption, what that's going to do to business partnerships, because we're all going to be looking for stability. Where are the rocks that we can hold on to?
Right.
And it seems like it could be a real positive thing for partnerships that we rely on each other even more.
I think that partnership that's a very strong word, and there's a lot implied behind that because a lot has to do with, the relationships that we have. And, we can be transactional in our relationships, and there we tend to buy on price. But if it's more partnership oriented, then there's this notion of an interdependency. And when we have these interdependencies, you probably then want me to be proactive. You don't want me to just sit there and react to things. You want me to, make you aware of, upcoming potholes in the road, so to speak. So that starts to imply there's a level of collaboration, a level of planning that goes together. Things like that, where we're now sitting in meetings together that historically you might have felt a little nervous about letting some of your, suppliers or partners come into. But, the reality is having these more tightly integrated partnerships can allow us to move faster and we can learn faster.
So whether we're talking about the disruption caused by AI or the disruption caused by tariffs and trade wars, working together, we're all smarter. We can all move faster with more confidence because we're benefiting from borrowed knowledge and borrowed confidence.
And the key is just we have to have aligned interests. It's hard to be good partners when your interests are not aligned. I mean, it sounds obvious, but again, when people tend to focus on price or some things like that, interests aren't always aligned. So selecting partners is more than that, just finding somebody who's got a good product at a good price.
I think you just hit on something, that the idea that in times of uncertainty, when we think about fit isn't somebody who's got the product that I need or the service that I need. More importantly, it's somebody who's aligned with the way we view the world and the future and how we're going to sustain ourselves in what's more and more an uncertain future.
Right. Essentially, I'm looking for people who, are willing to win together and lose together. There's a lot of anxiety and anxiousness around AI. And I think people are correct to be focused on understanding how they can leverage it, how it can impact them. But at the same time, AI is not a strategy. AI is a tool. And so understanding how to position and pitch your product or your service or your value, that's still paramount. Absolutely. You just want to understand, how can I leverage AI to help me with that? Or finding a qualified need. How can I leverage AI to help me with that? People tend to put tools sometimes and elevate them to a strategy. They're not a strategy. They are a supporting mechanism to strategy. So thinking through Martin and Lafley's cascading set of choices, where do we play? How do we win? What capabilities are must have? AI might fit into that part of how do we win must have capabilities, but it's not a where do we play, it's a supportive piece. So I think people just have to kind of keep that in mind. I know it's easy to get overexcited about this stuff, but by the same token, sticking your head in the sand, that's not helpful either.
No, that's even further from a strategy. I think we're at a place that feels eerily similar, even though I want to say in advance, I wasn't there. But when the Industrial Revolution actually brought internal combustion engines to farming, and the labor from the farms went to the cities to work in the factories, and the farmers either had to embrace gas and diesel-powered engines and be able to till 100 times more per person than they could before. Either they embraced that or they were out of business because prices dropped. And I mean, it changed the whole economics of farming. They still had to decide where they wanted to farm and what they were going to grow and where they were going to sell it.
I think that's a great analogy. And, that happened in manufacturing as well. And what you're seeing now is it's coming for parts of the service sector and parts of white collar office jobs, and there's going to be disruptions there for sure. But at the same token, it's going to create the space for new kinds of work, new kinds of jobs. Again, I'll go back to our demographics as a country. The only way that we're growing our population is if we import people, if you will, or immigration into the country. If we don't do that, well, even with doing that, we still have to find ways to become more productive, because that's the reality of the demographics and the demographic trends that have been in place for decades now. And they're not going away. And it's the same essentially in almost every industrialized nation. China's got huge problems with it. Their population's actually declining. Japan, same issue. Europe, same issue. So technology is going to play a role in augmenting us, and will continue to do so. It's just now hitting us in a place that, like you said, we went through in farming and manufacturing, decades ago.
So for us to embrace a future that we can be optimistic about growth, we have to use technology to learn faster, to be able to do more with the same headcount, and improve the product we're producing.
And not forgetting the fundamentals of, you still have to ask good questions. You still have to understand how to interact with other human beings. You still have to, figure out how to ascertain what's important to a marketplace. Those fundamentals don't change. And so just because we can make things go faster doesn't mean that we're making good choices. And when you turn over the decision making, you have to be very careful about that. So when people talk about responsible AI as an example that's really what they're trying to imply is, if we're talking about an AI that's sorting out perhaps bad quality on a production line that has thousands of items going through in a minute, sure, I'll turn the decision-making for sorting out an inspection to the AI. But if we're talking about, other hugely impactful and consequential choices to other human beings, then we have to take some time and think about that.
Yeah. It goes back to where we started, I think, or nearly where we started, Kurt, and that was humility, empathy, and curiosity.
Yes.
3 uniquely human characteristics that are more important than ever if we're going to grow the way we want to grow.
Yeah. So, I'll throw one more famous person into quote, Socrates.
Going way back.
Way back, yeah. But to paraphrase, when you're 20, you think you know everything. But, as he said, the older I get, the more I don't know. I realize what I don't know. So while I may know more on an absolute basis than I did, 20 years ago, I also realize the universe of knowledge is so much larger than I ever imagined, and realize there's so much more to understand and take into consideration. So I think we really have to understand that, and that humility and empathy and curiosity are the way that you have to approach those situations to make sure that we're not making stupid choices.
And it's interesting that you bring up Socrates in that context, because you can imagine that he was feeling empathy when he said that, humility certainly, and it sparked his curiosity of all the things he didn't know.
Right. Never connected those dots, but yeah, absolutely.
Didn't know this is going to be a liberal arts class. Well, thank you, Kurt. This has been a fascinating conversation. I wish we could keep it going. I'm sure we're going to come back and do a part 2. Because it feels like there's a part 2 and a part 3. But
yeah, well, growth is a fascinating topic. Yeah. I always in my career thought, there were sort of 2 sides of the equation. You can be focused on the expense side or the growth side. And
growth is much more fun.
Growth is much more fun. So my last quotation here, Bruce Springsteen, Mama told me not to look at the sights of the sun, but Mama, that's where all the fun is.
And he was born last of all the people you referenced, I think.
Yes.
Good. Got that right, at least. Well, thanks, Kurt.
Yeah,
This is a
thank you
blast.
so much.
Enjoy it.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Changeover podcast. Remember to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Weidert.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let us know what you'd like to hear about next time by messaging Weidert Group on social media. Thanks for listening.